Hi, I'm Sam Fessich from the EduMagic Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Alison Smith, the founder and CEO of The Thrive Designer. We're going to talk about burnout, resilience, coaching, and what Thrive stands for. So much to learn today. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you took a minute to help out the podcast. How could you? I'm glad you asked. Here are a couple ways. One, tell a friend and share the links. Two, you could go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And three, how about click on the link on my website homepage where it says Buy Me a Coffee. By doing this, you could donate $1 or $2 to help me address the cost associated with producing the podcast. That'd be so cool. Thanks so much. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
So I always say, I'm not an expert in your life. I'm not an expert in your work. I'm not an expert in the decisions you need to make. I am an expert in coaching.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Miletto. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. With Dr. Steve Miletto.
Alison Smith is an author, speaker, and coach. As an expert on burnout and how cultivating our resilience impacts our personal and professional lives, she speaks nationally to help audiences harness the power of small acts of resilience so they can design thriving lives. Alison is the CEO and founder of The Thrive Designer. She is a certified ICF professional certified coach. She has coached hundreds of highly motivated yet highly burnt out clients, from CEOs, leaders, teachers, entrepreneurs, and mothers, to name a few. Her work has been featured in a variety of publications, and her book, Drawing Your Line, Setting Boundaries Step by Step, has been a companion to many as they live life on healthier terms. Our focus will be the Thrive Designer. Alison, thanks so much for being on the show, and say hi to everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me, Stephen. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, glad to have you here, and you've been doing some really cool stuff with this coaching thing. And, you've been a professional coach for a while. What is something that you learned over those many hours of coaching, that pushes you to keep doing what you do?
I'll actually start way back from before I was a coach to when I first got coaching, because that taught me, I think, the most about coaching and about the power of coaching. So if you could wind back the clock about 12 years ago, I had just had my first kid and I was working and traveling and trying to learn the role of being a mom. And I felt like I couldn't catch my breath. I was burned out, to say the least, feeling like I was failing at everything. And I ended up meeting a coach. Didn't really know what the service of coaching was, but I liked her and I decided to work with her. And through that process, I realized that I had been listening to everyone else's solutions for my life. I had been reading all the books. I had been talking to people. I had started a mom's group so that we would have support. But all of that was adding more to my plate rather than actually helping me. Because at some point we reach the end of, or at least a moment where everyone else's advice isn't helping anymore. And what we need instead is to tune in and figure things out for ourselves, figure out how all that good advice applies and how we want to move forward. And that's what coaching did for me. It empowered me really for the first time in my life so that I was making the decisions. And my coach was a wonderful coach. She was a mentor of mine for years. And she would hold that space. She believed that I could solve my problems. She believed I was capable and resourceful and creative, even on days when those were the last words that I would have used to describe myself. But she held that space for me, and I could kind of borrow her belief in me to figure out how I wanted to move forward. And over time, I began to believe those things about myself. And so that is the truly unique and powerful thing about coaching. And now I have loved being able to come alongside people in that same position, in a similar position to where I was, who are feeling burned out and who are feeling stretched too thin and like they can't catch a breath. And I get to hold that space and I get to believe in them maybe more than they believe in themselves, right? And they get to borrow that and figure out what they want to do. And that empowers them. And ultimately, those are the solutions that end up working for us, more so than the solutions we may have heard or read about, et cetera. So it's really all about making it personal. And that's what I love about coaching. That's what keeps me going every day.
Very cool. I got to ask this question. Just go with me if you can. I think you can. So what is coaching and what isn't it?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this because there's a lot of misconceptions about coaching. A lot of times we think coaching is, a person with some kind of expertise who is telling you what to do, who's advising you. But really, that's consulting. Okay, so that's going to be my distinction. Consulting is when someone has, you're tapping into their expertise. You're learning from them. They're a mentor. They're going to show you the way. But coaching is where the coach is really helping you find the way. So I always say, I'm not an expert in your life. I'm not an expert in your work. I'm not an expert in the decisions you need to make. I am an expert in coaching. And so I will use the tools of coaching, which is, deeply listening, being able to listen to not only what you're saying, but what you're not saying, listening to the words that you say and how those words may expose certain mental models that you have or beliefs that you have. And then I'll check in with you about them. Like, for example, a common one that shows up is someone might say, well, it's been a good week because I, got a lot of stuff done. And I've checked off a lot of things on my to-do list, and I feel like it's been a really productive week. To me, those words then, as a coach, I hear this person defines success as producing, as being productive. And then I can just share that with them. Oh, so it sounds like what really defines a good week is accomplishing a lot. And then they'll sometimes go, oh, yeah, for sure, that is. Okay, and how might that be serving you, and how might that not be serving you? Right? What happens on the week when you don't accomplish a lot? Can you still feel like it was a good week? What informs you then? What metrics do you use then? So that's just a small example of what I listen for beneath the surface as a coach. I don't tell them you shouldn't define a good week as being productive. I just offer that and expose that so that they can then decide if that works for them or if it doesn't. So that's really the distinction that I like to make between coaching and what, oftentimes gets called coaching, but is really consulting.
Gotcha. I appreciate you taking a second to talk about that. All right. So let's take a moment we talked about coaching. Now let's talk a little bit about a couple other terms that we can't ignore because they came out in your bio and it's a big part of what you do. So the first one I want to ask you is, what does burnout mean to you?
So burnout has actually been defined by the World Health Organization. So we actually know from research what the components of burnout are. And it's three things. So I call them the 3 red flags of burnout. And they are, 1, exhaustion. So I'm too tired. I'm too under-resourced to solve my problems, right? I'm exhausted. The second red flag is ineffectiveness. So I feel like I have problems that I can't solve. I don't feel a sense of agency or power to solve the things that are burning me out. And the third red flag is cynicism. So that's the word that the World Health Organization uses, and that's based on the work of Dr. Christina Maslach. I don't love the word cynicism, but here's how they define it, and then I'll tell you the word I like to use instead. They define it as seeing the people that you're trying to serve as the source of your problems. So in an education context, it may be, my staff or my students or the parents, the families are the source of my problems, right? The word I like to use instead is resentment. That feeling of resentment, that I'm starting to resent the very people I'm trying to serve. And so those three things, when taken together, when experienced together, are really the hallmarks of burnout.
Gotcha. Appreciate you sharing that, because it's one of those things that, there's a lot of stuff going in our worlds. And, it's one of those, it's just that idea that kind of getting a concept of, really understanding what you're thinking about. What is it that you're feeling? Is this something other than, what is it that I should be doing right now? I guess is my point is that it's so easy sometimes you listen to people talk about, oh, I'm burned out. That's a very popular word right now. And it's become popularized to the point that I think that we don't recognize the symptoms when it really is something we're dealing with, because you're listening to this person and that person talk about it. Yeah, I'm not like them. I don't know, Anyway, I don't know what you think about that. But
I completely agree with you. I think it's kind of like the word anxiety or even the word stress, frankly. There are actual definitions to these words, and oftentimes we use them colloquially and kind of throw them around. But if you learn about what those symptoms are, then you can actually articulate what it is you need. And I call them red flags because to me, if I'm exhausted, then I know that my body is telling me I need to rest. I need to rest in some way, whether it's, body rest, I need physical rest, or maybe I need emotional rest. I need to be able to be alone for a little bit and process, right? I need some kind of rest. If it's that I feel ineffective, what can I do to feel more effective? How can I tune my attention toward the things I am accomplishing? So often, those things we accomplish, we pass right on by them. They're a check on our checklist and we move on. And we're just continuing to focus on the things that still have yet to be done, or the learning gains that still need to be made, the kids who still have not reached our achievement levels we want them to achieve. All of those things are adaptive, where we're focusing our energy, but over time can burn us out. So when we can connect some of our patterns to those red flags of burnout, then we can start making changes to those patterns. That's why I say it's really about small acts of resilience. It's about finding those smaller but higher leverage actions that actually help us overcome burnout.
Gotcha. All right. So something that goes with that you talk about is resilience. All right. So what is that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. And actually, I want to first tell you how I define the word thriving, because that's connected to how I define resilience. And when someone is feeling burned out, they don't want to talk about thriving, but I think that it's important that we do. The reason we don't want to talk about thriving when we're burned out is because typically the way we all define thriving is success, achievement, accomplishing our goals, all with energy and enthusiasm, right? I'm achieving all that I want to achieve. I'm happy about it. I'm energized about it. I'm enthusiastic about it. This is thriving. We have a picture in our minds of someone with their arms spread out, and embracing life. And they have the energy and enthusiasm, zest for life. But you can see that's directly in conflict with how we just defined burnout. But here's what we get wrong about thrive and about thriving. The actual word thrive comes from an Old Norse word, like the original meaning of the word thrive. And that original Norse word meant to grasp to oneself, to be grounded, to be rooted in yourself. And I think where we've gotten thriving twisted, it's because it's really easy to hold on to ourselves and grasp to ourselves when we're achieving, when we're accomplishing things, when we're reaching our goals, when we're energized, when we're enthusiastic. That's easy. But it's really hard to do that when we're experiencing exhaustion, ineffectiveness, resentment, those kind of depleting feelings. But by looking at that original definition of the word thrive, it is possible to thrive even in burnout. We can grasp back to ourselves. And that's how I define resilience, is not just a pushing through and a toughing through and failing forward and all those things that we've heard about with resilience. I define it as coming back to ourselves, because those moments of burnout, those moments of adversity are moments where we get thrown off center. We're exhausted. We're not resourced. We're feeling ineffective. We're not feeling purposeful. All those things pull us away from our sturdy center. And so what are the things that we can do that will bring us back to our center? That's where we actually have a wellspring of resilience within us. So our resilience is coming back to the sturdy center, even in times of adversity. You think about making a really hard decision. Leaders can feel really lonely when they have to make a hard decision that's not popular. But when you can hold on to yourself and your convictions and your values, okay, this is the right thing to do, even if everyone doesn't agree or understand. That is sturdy leadership from this internal sturdiness, right? When we have confidence that comes from an internal sturdiness, we don't have to prove ourselves. We don't have to boast about our accomplishments. We just show up and we do it, right? So all of the things that we know are important in leadership, whether it's classroom leadership, school leadership, or leadership in our communities, all comes down to being grounded in that sturdy center internally. And that's how I define resilience. Coming back to that place over and over again, however many times we need to.
That's cool because, my audience are educators of all types. And, in the last couple of years, some of them have been trying to get to that resilience place because what's happened is this feeling of burnout, overwhelm, and the need to give up has risen quite a bit. And, trying to get to that spot of resilience, because one of the things that I love about when you're working in school settings and working with the educators and helping them do what they do, and then back to the day, is that there's nothing better than trying to figure out how to get the light bulb to go on, and then helping that happen. And that's how I found my center. How I found the things that made me overcome whatever. I got too much going on over here. I got too much going on over there, but I know that a lot of people, they struggle with that ability to find that thing that makes them go, this is what I'm focused on, and I'm going to do this, and this is where I'll get my, I used to have a colleague who used to talk about going to his happy place. And I don't know what you think.
I think we all have different recipes or equations for how to do that. In fact, when I speak to groups of teachers, I will ask them, what are things that bring you back to your center? And sometimes you'll hear sort of the typical self-care routines that are talked about, taking time alone, going on a walk. But I have heard someone literally say rock climbing. And I asked, what about rock climbing brings you back to your center? And they said, well, when I do rock climbing, it's literally incumbent on me to be safe, to focus on what I'm doing, to let everything else go out of my mind and just focus on one hold at a time. I have to do that to stay safe and on the wall. And so that is their way of coming back to and kind of tuning everything else out to come back to their own breath, their own, focus on what they're doing in the present moment. They're really coming back to the present moment, right? Other people say they want to go, tap into a friend and connect with a friend, that actually helps them remember who they are and helps drive them. Others, like you, and myself included, a big part of my own resilience was finding something in the day that felt really meaningful and purposeful, that light bulb moment of the day, and capturing those and tuning my attention to those so that I felt like I was making the difference that I was there to try to make, So I think, and this is why I think coaching is a great tool for resilience building, because it is a unique equation. And I can't tell everyone how they need to do that, but I can ask the question, what are those things that bring you back to your center? And what will it take you to be able to do those?
Love it. It's awesome. You're talking before when you're in leadership positions that it gets lonely. And one of the things that I used to do is play soccer, play in the marching band in the stands during football season with my trumpet and the kids. And, those two things, first of all, there's nothing like in the beginning when I started playing soccer with the kids as a principal, that I would get chosen last. And eventually they started choosing me sooner, and it didn't have to do with my skills. I'm a much better coach than a kid. It had more to do with them realizing, hey, we'll have the principal on our team, type of thing. But and then with the band, it was, goofing around, doing the dances and the songs and doing all the fun stuff. You have to have been a band kid at some point to understand what I'm talking about. It's just a band thing. But, it's one of those things that really break you out of that, whatever the problems are that just making you go, oh my gosh, getting critical and all that sort of stuff that, I used to talk about. It's kind of like my timeout, putting myself in timeout. Let's go do this. So.
Yes. I love that for a couple of reasons. I think you tap into something really important there, which is that students got to see you as a human being, having fun with them. Staff can see you as a human being when things like that happen. You're being lighthearted. And humor and lightheartedness is a pretty well-researched component of resilience that oftentimes will just bring us back to our inner self, like our actual essence of who we are, being goofy or, making connections with people, because the problems will take us off center. Like that's just part of how it goes. And so whatever you need to do, whether that's, like you said, take a time out or go play with the band, like it's bringing you back to who you really are. And then from there, you can address the problem. And you will probably have more clarity, more perspective, and ultimately more confidence in your decision and in your way forward.
Love that. Awesome. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the Thrive Designer. So what inspired you to create this?
Well, to my point earlier, I love coaching. I have just become such a fan of the tool of coaching, especially for this day and age and in our U.S. kind of society, because so often we are told we have to achieve and produce and all of these things. And then we're reading all the books of all the experts of other people who've been really successful, and I'm doing air quotes, successful by that definition. And we're like following the steps of the people who have burnt out before us. And instead, I think coaching can be such a great tool to tune in, get back to that center, and figure out what your specific equation is, right? And so I knew when I tapped into that for myself and experienced that for myself, that teachers needed that educators needed it, that the system of education could be transformed if we had these kinds of skills and tools and resources and supports at our disposal. So I looked around to find coaches for teachers. And of course, at the time, is mostly instructional coaching. And to this day, it's still really instructional coaching. But I would say thanks to Elena Aguilar and other folks who are starting to take it from instructional consulting to really instructional coaching, and really in that lane of coaching versus consulting. So you're not just going in as the expert, the pedagogy expert, you're going in as a coach and working with teachers to develop as professionals. So that's getting to be there. But I really saw that resilience coaching was necessary, because everywhere I was going, and at the time I was working for Chevron as a STEM professional development, in a STEM professional development capacity. So I was going all around the country, training teachers. Actually we were training teachers how to use solar data coming from solar installations on their schools. And so I'm teaching them about the data, teaching them about renewable energy and STEM teaching and all of that. And they would say to me, school after school, state after state, this is all great, but we have too much on our plates. When am I supposed to do this? I want to do this. This would be an awesome learning experience for kids, but I have this to do, that to do, that to do, and the district won't let me do something new, right? And so I just saw burnout and overwhelm and a lack of empowerment getting in the way, not only for our program was cool, but it was getting in the way of all pedagogy. You know, we were starting to see kids as our problem instead of who we're there to serve. And I really knew that coaching, like on that individual level, needed to be part of the solution. And so at the time, no one was doing that. There was no other coaches for teachers that teachers could hire privately to help them find the balance they needed so that they could do their jobs well. And so I was like, okay, then I guess I'm going to create the solution that I needed and that these teachers need. And so I did both for a long time, you know, professional development and coaching on the side. And now it has become, you know, such a large part of what I do that now that's my only job.
That's awesome. Love it. All right. So something I've heard you say, or note that you've said, is this: I've walked a similar path, understanding the challenges and triumphs that come with it. How does this help you help others?
I think it makes me more authentic to people. You know, I have been there too. I shared a little bit of my story with you. There have been other things in my life that I have had to overcome that have required tremendous amounts of resilience. And I am not an expert in how to live life. I'm certainly not an expert in how to live the lives of your listeners. But I do know that when we take the time to work on these things for ourselves, our lives are improved. And so I think that, you know, I never want to work with someone who has never had any adversity or been through anything hard. To me, going through hard things is part of the qualifications of a fellow human being that I want to connect to. You know, I want to know what has been hard that you have walked through. I want to know what you have gone through, what fires you've had to walk through yourself, because that has shaped who you are and it has shaped who I am. And so when I work with people, although I'm not sharing with them exactly how what I went through, because that wouldn't be making it about me, I am using my past to ask empathetic and authentic questions. I recognize some of the similar mental models and beliefs that were holding me back. I will offer those to people. I use my intuition. I always say it's my greatest coaching tool, is my intuition when something is coming up. But I always offer it objectively. I'm not attached to it. And so all of those are things that I've developed because of what I've been through, because of my story in my life. And so that makes me a great coach, an empathetic listener. And certainly part of my story is being in the classroom. And teachers need to know that you've been there, that you understand what it's like, that you have stood in front of a classroom full of kids and had those moments that are hard and challenge, where you've panicked or where you've gotten stressed out, or what. They need to know that I've been there. That builds credibility and a connection between us, regardless of if I ever share specific solutions that I did when I was a teacher.
That's awesome. I love it. All right. So one of the things that you talk about is 6 principles of Thrive Design. Can you give us a little look at those?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. So I have talked a lot about how it is resilience is a personal calculation and it's different for each person. I do believe that. The name of the organization is called the Thrive Designer, and not because I'm the Thrive Designer, but because I believe each person is the Thrive Designer for their own life. I'm the Thrive Designer in my life, and you, Stephen, are the Thrive Designer in your life. I think when we bring our own creativity to our lives, we can design solutions that will help us come back to our sturdy center and thrive. So that being said, over and over and over in the hundreds of conversations, the thousands of conversations, the hundreds of clients that I've worked with, 6 things keep coming up. They keep coming up as what underlies either the things that burn us out or the things that help us build our resilience. And so I created these 6 Thrive design principles. And to me, they're kind of like things that you can go into any situation of your life and think about redesigning it with these 6 principles. So they spell the acronym Thrive so that it's easy to remember. The T is trust, trusting, building a sense of self-trust, not only in your capabilities, but in your intentions. Like when I know that I can be generous with myself, I'm not being judgmental of myself, I have a trusting relationship with myself, then I can take risks. Then I can actually try to be innovative. I can go for a job that I don't end up getting. I can go for I can say no to a committee because I trust myself, right? So trust is probably the heaviest hitting of these concepts, but it is absolutely underneath almost every single conversation I have with a client. Is a trust issue somewhere. And I'm specifically talking about trust within yourself. Okay, so that's T. H is human-centered. So treating ourselves as human beings, acknowledging our human limitations, our needs, our needs for rest, our needs for sleep. I can't even tell you how many people I have worked with who just are not acknowledging that they do need sleep. They need a good 7 to 9 hours. And that is inconvenient, but it is a need, so just as an example. But so often we treat ourselves like human doings rather than human beings. And that involves us acknowledging our human needs, but also knowing that we're valuable, we're worthy before we even do a thing. Just like our students, they're worthy and valuable before they learn anything. We give them all the freedom in the world to learn and grow and make mistakes, but we don't treat ourselves that same way. So that's the H, human-centered. R is responsive, and that's in direct contrast to reactive. So often we're reactive, we act on something that's happening instead of taking the space and choosing how we want to respond. So we have to give ourselves that space so that we can choose how we want to respond. In that space, we're coming back to ourselves. We're coming back to our sturdy center, and then we're responding from there, rather than reacting from the thrown off center place, right? So that's R, responsive. I is incremental. We're focused on incremental steps done consistently rather than the big change we want to make. Every big initiative is done one small thing at a time. We don't get from A to Z without going A, B, C, D, E, right? We have to go focus on one small step at a time. And that helps us stay focused. It also keeps us from getting overwhelmed. So always, a lot of times when people are burned out or overwhelmed, break it down. What's the next right action? That's incremental. V is values driven. So am I driven from the things that feel most meaningful and important to me? To your point earlier about, focusing on the light bulb moments with the students, that when you can put your attention there and when you can be driven by that, it fuels you. It keeps you going. When we have lost touch with what is most important to us, we will never feel really solid and grounded. And then we're just kind of being driven by what other people want, or what we think the community wants us to do, or what we think the staff wants us to do, or this will be driven by all kinds of things that will keep us thrown off, that will keep us away from ourselves instead of solidly centered in ourselves. And so doing the work to really identify what's of value to you, or if you're a leader in an organization, what's of value to our organization? What do we value? And how can that drive us? Right? And then the E is empowered. And this is about focusing on what you can control and letting go of what you can't control. So often our energy goes to things that we cannot control. They're out of our control. We have no power to change it. And that disempowers us, even if it's right to be upset or to worry about those things. The more time we spend on things that we can't control, it actually just takes our energy from things that we can control. So if we're upset about an initiative, what is it that we can do about it? Right? And so just asking ourselves over and over, what can I do? What is in my control? What can I influence? What action do I want to take? That will empower us to be able to design our next actions. So those are the Thrive design principles: trusting, human-centered, responsive, incremental, values-driven, and empowered. And so any place in your life that you're struggling with right now, life, and I say life because I'm going to include your personal and your professional. Any area that you're struggling with, go through those Thrive design principles and see which one feels like it's the best place to start. And I guarantee you, one of those is going to be popping out, to you. Oh, that's what I need to do. I need to break it down. And I need to focus on one small step. Oh, I need to focus on what I can control. Oh, I didn't give myself space to come back to myself so that I could respond. I need to figure out what I need to do to respond. I'm not treating myself like a human being. Those will all come up. And then just start there. It gives you a place to start to help design what your unique solutions are.
It's an awesome acronym, all right, and it hits so many areas right on the nail on the head. And the one I got to center in on is human-centered, because I think so many times in education that's one of the things that gets us, because we're focused on everybody but us. And so yes is the magic word always, as opposed to, yeah, I'd love to, but I can't. Or, and next thing you know is you're grading papers at 1 a.m, or you're sending emails at 1 a.m, or, and you'd love to be watching TV or maybe sleeping. That sleep thing, who needs sleep? It's underrated, man. You start doing all this sort of stuff until one day your teammate down the hallway or your assistant principal or somebody says to you, "Can we talk just a second? Because you're about to kill everybody." So anyway, all of that really hits home. But that human-centered one, I think, just really, oh my gosh, it's a big part. It's if you're not careful, it'll reach up and bite those educators, and they'll suddenly have a lot of stuff going on that they didn't see it coming.
Absolutely. And, I think that this is where sometimes advice can feel tone deaf, because if someone says, hey, you need to get 8 hours of sleep a night, hey, you need to, and then they're going, but you're also telling me I need to grade these papers. So what do I do with that? Right. And that's where then when we can go, okay, here's the challenge. We've got sleep, which we need, and we've got, feedback we need to give to students. So how can we look at how we design things differently so that those needs can be met? And these are not easy solutions. They're not. They're going to be different for each person. I've worked with folks who will say, oh, well, you can just use one of those grader programs that'll grade all your stuff for you, right? But that's okay. That solves the, I'm in bed, but that doesn't maybe solve the other thing that I'm trying to accomplish, which is to provide really rich and valuable feedback. So I think by having real conversations about this stuff, rather than just telling teachers they need to take care of themselves, but by really engaging in the places where this rubs, right? The places where this conflicts with the other expectations we have for teachers, then we're going to get into really rich discussions about how we prioritize and what we prioritize in a teacher's day.
That's so awesome. It's so difficult, and I can only imagine in other fields as well. I mean, because I have plenty of friends who, I have an engineer friend who he has to be on a Zoom, not sponsored by Zoom, but whatever. He's on one of those calls, those virtual calls, and because lots of the team are in different countries around the world. They have to do it at like midnight to kind of get close to when these meetings don't last like 15 minutes. They last like 2.5 hours. And I don't understand how in the world he does that, because there's plenty of my colleagues that you're up at that time, just trying to finish up something because of whatever else is part of your day. I mean, as a administrator in a high school, you monitor sports and stuff like this. Meanwhile, you've got all this stuff that's got to get done at some point, and you really can't do it if you're really monitoring what's going on at the activity, whatever that is. And so it really hit home, though, this human-centered part. I didn't mean to keep you on that wavelength for so long, but it's
no, I love it. I think that's the one that resonates most for people, because we are mission-driven folks. And I love working with mission-driven folks, people who serve their communities, whether it's in education or nonprofit work, et cetera. That's my bread and butter of who I love to work with. When you are working in service of a community or of a mission, it drives you, and it will drive you to put yourself last. And that is adaptive and beautiful and wonderful to a certain point. And then at some point that flips. Someone in a workshop I was doing this summer said, I realized in doing my values clarification that I now realize why I love being on committees. I love leading change. I love being a catalyst for change and growth. And that's, I think, why I sign up for all these committees. But at some point, then I start resenting it. It's like too much of a good thing is too much, right? Like you could be doing things that feel really important and meaningful and powerful for you, but taken together, it's just too much. And that's where it's like nice to have someone to sit down with you and be like, I'm not going to let you go from this conversation until you figure out something you want to try on this, because these are not quick and easy solutions. And when we're moving 1,000,000 miles an hour, we don't take the time to sit down and really come up with them. And I'm going to encourage people to do so, have an accountability partner that, you guys can get together and be like, okay, I need your brain power here to help me on this issue. Great. But if you can, work with a coach, because a coach is going to have that space, hold that space and keep you accountable to actually pushing through to figure out solutions that work for you.
Love it. That is awesome. Okay, this is cool. Alison, one of the things I want to ask you is, now you do a lot of personalized coaching. What's that look like when someone works with you?
Yeah, so when someone reaches out to me and starts to work with me as their coach, we first start by identifying the things they want to redesign. Said another way, what are their goals? What are their goals? What do they need to see themselves change? And I always say, like, in the next 30, 60, 90 days. And we start with those things. We will brainstorm a lot of change that they want to make, and then we break it down and pick 1 or 2 things to start with first, because the I is incremental. We're going to start with the small step, not necessarily the small steps like where we take them in size, but we start with one thing at a time. So it might feel like the highest leverage thing. For example, I know we're kind of beating a dead horse here on the sleep thing, but sleep is a high leverage action, because when you have gotten enough sleep, you are more resourced, you have more mental clarity instead of feeling brain fog, things like that, right? And so if that's their high leverage action they want to start with, then we're going to go into, okay, so what's it going to take to get more sleep? What also needs to be addressed in order to get more sleep? So they're going to say something like, well, I need to figure out how to get through this grading, or I need to figure out how to manage my nighttime commitments here at school, where I'm overseeing these activities, and they're going to identify the things that they need to address along the way. And so that really creates a roadmap. So we start with the goals, then we create the roadmap, and then we meet usually 2 to 3 times a month, sometimes once a month, especially if they've been coaching with me for a while. We'll just do once a month so they can kind of just have a accountability partner and a check-in once a month. But usually they're starting with me at 2 or 3 times a month. And we're working through that roadmap. And we are working over the phone or Zoom to work toward their goals. So I'm holding that space for them. I'm coaching them, listening for the beliefs that might be getting in the way, the mental models, the patterns that are coming up, and then offering those to them. They will, decide what they want to do with those. Like, for example, it seems like your pattern is to, push what you wanted to do for the night aside if an emergency comes up at school. Yeah, that is my pattern. They might say, yeah, that is my pattern. I have to do that because I have to take care of the emergencies at school. Okay, well, what would be an option, right? And so then we're going to be talking about, well, what would be options, other ways of looking at things, et cetera. So that's where we, the coaching takes over. And then at the end of the call, they're going to figure out what they want to practice, what they want to experiment with between now and the next time that we talk, so that they're moving forward. We're constantly looking at how you create forward momentum to shape and redesign the aspects of your life that may be burning you out or may be causing you problems so that you can lead and live in the way you want.
Very nice. Very nice. I like that. All right. Got a scenario for you. If you were talking with an audience of educators who are getting ready to start the new school year, in most of our U.S., this is happening right now.
Yes.
What would be something that you would want to tell them about facing the challenges of the year?
This is such a good question. And thankfully, I've had a chance to be in front of some teachers recently. And so this is based on what I told them and what we worked on. So when we think about the beginning of the year, oftentimes as a teacher, you're thinking about like, okay, I took this big, deep breath in, and now I've got to, exhale the whole school year. And it's almost like we see the summers as like our time to resource ourselves so that we can go the whole distance of the school year. And I just think that sets us up for failure. I almost think of it as, if I have to dive down to the deep end of the pool, I'm going to take a big breath in and then I'm going to dive down to the deep end of the pool. By the time I get to the bottom, my body is starting to panic, right? And I'm like, okay, I need to get up there and get some air, right? And so I'm uncomfortably swimming to the top and kind of, again, surviving, just getting to where I can breathe again. Fine. Sometimes we have to do that, but that's not sustainable. Instead, I'd like us to shift our perspective to that of like an endurance swimmer. Maybe these sports analogies are coming up because the Olympics are on, I'm not sure. But I want to think of an endurance swimmer where they are building in breaths into their stroke. They are skimming along the surface of the water and they're going quickly, but they're building in their breath. What are the ways that we can build in breaths? What are the ways that we can build in small ways done consistently that will help us stay resilient? So whether that's building in a weekly, meeting with a friend or, daily gratitude practice to help tune your attention to the things that went well that day instead of the things that went wrong. Whatever those rhythms are, build them in regularly. Build them in regularly, but make them small enough that you can do them with consistency. It's not about the big inhale, getting a massage, or taking an hour for yourself. Those may feel like really big asks. And I use the getting a massage or taking a yoga class because those are often told to teachers as things they could do. Oh, we'll go get a massage. Like that's going to solve everything, or going to a yoga class. I think those are great. But how about you go to a yoga class once a week? How about you, maybe take a 5-minute walk a couple times a week instead of trying to carve out 1 hour. So don't try to do things that feel too big or overwhelming. Break it down to something small that you could do consistently. I have teachers who will just build in a ritual in the morning of having their coffee before looking at their phone. And it's like 5 to 10 minutes of time for themselves before anyone else needs them. And that alone can be transformative. I've had teachers who will come home at the end of the day and make themselves a cup of tea and sit there and force themselves to slow down. And that's their way that they build in those like regular breaths that help you endure, that help, because this is an endurance swim, not a dive deep.
Oh, that is awesome. I like that. That is good stuff right there. And it's, because too often we are trying to do that deep dive and then we're running out of breath and all that sort of stuff. And then it's that's way too much. And it's, but I love your advice there. Good stuff. And so all those who are getting ready to start school, hey, and if you're listening to this after school started, it's still great advice. So keep that in mind. All right. So we're getting ready to wrap up, Alison. Where can our listeners find additional information, connect, and learn more?
Yeah, they can go to my website. It's thethrivedesigner.com. They can find me on Instagram or LinkedIn as well. Would love to connect with you there. I will say, too, I do host a webinar series for educators that they can tap into. So you can find all that information on my website or my socials.
Excellent. I will put that information in the show notes so it's easy to find and go there. All right, so I got two last questions. And the first one goes like this. You have a book. It's called Drawing Your Line, Setting Boundaries Step by Step. Tell us what it's about.
It's about setting boundaries. And I wrote this with a friend of mine who's also a coach. And we were seeing boundaries as such a critical leverage action. And specifically, we're talking about not just work-life boundaries, but boundaries in terms of knowing what is your responsibility and what is not your responsibility, what is okay with you and what's not okay with you. And then being able to have not only the courage, but the tact and the finesse of how to set those boundaries. And what we noticed is that oftentimes when someone had any kind of boundary challenge or a hard time saying no, or a hard time, letting people do things that were not okay with them, treating them in ways that were not okay, etc. That usually came down to sort of a crack in the foundation of themselves, some kind of belief that they weren't worthy of that, or people pleasing and things like that. And so this book is actually a conversation between my friend, who is very, very good at boundaries, and me, who is not good at boundaries. And I have had to learn those over the years. And so it's a conversation between the two of us, sharing what we have learned along the way. For her, what she has always known to be true about how she showed up in the world, and for me, how I had to learn. But it is a workbook, so it's going to be something that people can pick up and work through to build their personal foundation and ultimately be able to set boundaries in their life.
Very cool. Awesome. I appreciate you talking about it. All right, last question, and it goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it, and what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Well, you talked about your marching band experience, and you said you can only be a band person to know what that's like. And I do know what that's like because I too was in the marching band. And so it was my marching band director. He was our band director for our high school. And his name was Bill Richardson. And he's a very dear friend of mine to this day. He ended up being in my life for years and years after high school. But I was thinking about this in preparation for you asking me this question and thinking, what was it about him that was so powerful and transformative in my life? He was a person who saw what I was capable of and believed in me when I didn't see that in myself. And as I was reflecting on that, I'm like, that's what I'm doing for people now. And how cool is that? But he really was one of the first people who saw more in me than I could see in myself. And it made me want to rise to that occasion. It made me want to be that person he saw that I could be. So I would just tell him, thank you. And he has heard me say that. And, I'd like to say I was the only one, but there is actually hundreds of people like me who, if given the chance to answer that question, would say his name.
That's awesome. I love it. That's so cool. And kudos for being a band person.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. What a cool bunch of memories and all that sort of stuff, and to have that impact. And so thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for talking with us about the Thrive Designer, resilience and burnout. What a focus, incredible focus you have. Much needed services, excellent ideas, and I'm wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching Learning Leading K12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching Learning Leading K12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.